Hi, my name's Tanya Tarr. I'm really excited to be a part of the Bureau of Digital's activities today. I'm really excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is helping organizations build strong bonds and strong teams and how to boost trust and loyalty in the modern workplace. So, a little bit about me. I am an organizational development strategist, basically a management consultant, and I help large global companies and small to medium sized companies. I help them build high trust, high performing teams. And the motto of my company, Cultivated Insights, is I really believe we get smarter together. And I've seen this with a lot of the different clients that I've worked with, some of which are here up on the screen. I've been doing corporate training and learning and development for the last couple of years now. Before that, I spent 17 years working in electoral politics and in legislative advocacy work with employee organizations. Most of them were public sector employees, and I spent the last 6 years here in Texas, where I live, working for Texas public school employees, teachers and janitors and bus drivers. And before that, I spent some time working with military families and also in counterintelligence. So you might look at my job history and think, wow, this is kind of all over the place. But the through line to this whole career of mine has been to understand how individuals and also groups make decisions, right? What motivates them to make decisions and move towards action. And collaboration is a really important type of action, right? And it really makes you think, how do you define collaboration? A really key element of collaboration is trust. So we're going to explore that. So this is a scene from one of my favorite movies, Fifth Element. I tend to think about collaboration and negotiation interchangeably. I know not everyone does, but would this situation inspire trust? I don't know. Bruce Willis is asking, does anyone else want to negotiate? Seems kind of like a tense situation. Does this situation inspire trust? So this is also kind of a confrontational, combative situation. This is from a movie called Up in the Air. Does it look like George Clooney's character is negotiating? I don't think so. It looks like he's kind of calling the shots there, right? It's not exactly a situation that inspires trust. Does this inspire trust? This is a GIF. All these are GIFs from, different pop culture settings. In this case, it's 30 Rock, and he's negotiating a divorce and the separation of assets. So does this situation inspire trust? Not really, right? There's positional language here. I will take this if you take that. And it's often how we think of negotiation, and unfortunately, a lot of collaborations, it's about being positional and it's about what's in it for me, right? So here's the issue with that. In our daily lives, we're part of a team, usually, right? We're part of a team, and that means that there are an infinite number of negotiations and collaborations that happen with our teammates, right? That we're constantly trying to build relationship and rapport with the people that touch our work, right? We're trying to convince people and persuade them to see our way of thinking, to help promote a project or an idea that we're trying to create, a solution we're trying to create at work. And that means getting a whole lot of people with different perspectives and a diversity of skill set to hold together to a common vision to get us from that idea or that problem towards building out the solution that helps us help our customers and help our constituents, and helps us get past the goal line on time, hopefully, and under budget. But if we're doing it correctly, not only are we solving business problems, but we're also deepening relationships within our organizations, not only to create excellent solutions, but also, hopefully, in its best form, we're creating friendships and relationships that are meaningful, that create purpose in our lives. So I want to invite you to go on this journey with me. I'm going to talk about a really interesting point of failure that I think is also was a trigger point to me doing more examination on how we connect. And it reminded me of this concept of mirror neurons and how that develops and deepens trust. It also led me to beta test an idea and to create a really interesting science experiment. And I can't wait to share the results of that experiment with you too. Not only because I'm excited about what it tells us about how we can connect with other people, but it can be meaningful for you regardless of where you're coming from. It could be meaningful for you if you're a teammate trying to just do a better job being a teammate, or it could be meaningful for you and helpful for you if you're leading a team or an organization. Maybe you're the CEO of your company. So let's start. Let's start with the failure. So a couple of months ago, I had a really busy week. I got booked to do 3 workshops in 3 different cities. And the first workshop was with a big global tech company. And it was about 50 people in a division. And it was a long workshop. It was about a 3.5-hour workshop. And I knew that it didn't land right. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, whenever I do a workshop with people, I kind of think of it as building an invisible plane together, right? We're all in a room together. And I'm trying to convince these people to get in this invisible plane that we're creating together, which is the workshop, the container, right? And then we're going to go up in this plane. We're going to go on a journey. We're going to learn some cool stuff. And then I'm going to land the plane. And when I think of landing the plane in a workshop, it means that I help people understand how all the different threads of all the different activities we did together converge at a point of new perspective and hopefully a launch point for them to use these skills in their daily lives. I had done a lot of preparation for this workshop. There were a lot of sticky notes. There were a lot of breakout activities. There were a lot of quizzes. It was great fun. But I knew that it didn't quite hit its mark. Something about the training went a bit flat. And there are things that I look for as someone who's done facilitation and training for 20 years. There are things that I look for that let me know that this training either landed correctly or it didn't hit its mark, right? And I knew that I hadn't gotten there, right? So some of it is how much are the participants looking at their devices or staring off into space or not engaging with me or engaging with their colleagues. But then there's something else too that I couldn't even really tell you what it was, but it's something that feels like the purpose I was trying to drive home here didn't quite make it all the way through, didn't fully land, right? And I've come to find out later that some of it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with things going on in the organization, but I'm a perfectionist. And I spent a lot of time thinking about why it wasn't working in the way I was hoping it would work. So I get on the first of many planes to go back to Texas. And when I'm getting on this plane, I notice that the flight attendants are all joking with each other. And they really seem to genuinely like each other, which I always find to be really interesting. Because I'm really fascinated by and a nerd about, high performing teams. And I got sat in an aisle seat. And so I got to see these flight attendants do their whole pre-flight set of announcements. I'm kind of a goofball and I like to make eye contact with the flight attendants. I feel like it just feels respectful to me, and they often don't get enough respect. And so I know they've done these flight checks a million times. But I always kind of pay attention. And on that particular flight, it was interesting watching from my perspective in the seat. I could see 3 of these flight attendants and they were all moving in perfect unison, in just perfect synchronous unison. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really interesting. What's going on here? Right? And I had an idea. Well, this little idea, this phrase popped up in my head, and it was mirror neurons. And I was like, what is that all about? And I kind of had the sense that mirror neurons have something to do with our ability to interact with one another. That it really is actually about the mirroring of activity, and sometimes about learning from one another. So let's talk a little bit about this phenomenon, right? So it's fairly new. In 1992, Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma in Italy and his team were doing research on macaque monkeys, and they were trying to understand what parts of the brain lit up when they were learning new things, like how to pick up a grape or something like that in the lab. And what they found was, almost by accident, that the monkey was learning how to do things from watching the humans eat dinner. And so Rizzolatti reached out to Marco Iacoboni, I'm probably getting his name wrong, at the University of California at Los Angeles. They collaborated with one another, and Iacoboni is a neuroscientist who does a lot with fMRI machines that scan sort of parts of the brain light up. And so they were able to actually map out and show that mirror neurons, literally the mirroring of watching an action, right, was real. It wasn't just theory. And in 2009, Scott Willermuth at the University of Southern California applied this to the business setting and towards organizational behavior. And his research shows how by doing synchronous activities together to creating that team and group cohesion, that actually helps people stay involved. And one of his studies that showed that it could help reduce freeloader effect. So basically, when you're having people do things together, it helps everyone cooperate, and that leads to better outcomes. So boosting mirror neurons could boost cooperation in groups. And that the hallmarks to pay attention to here are that this phenomenon is created when you take synchronous action with each other, right? It helps, we think, build trust, empathy, and collaboration. It helps in learning new skills. I saw one study that showed that it actually helped mitigate pain through dance, which is another synchronous activity. And they think that this is what helps on the brain side. It leads to helping foster those emotional, social bonds and friendship. And so it really got me thinking about what happens when we move in unison together, when we do synchronous activity together. And it made me think of a study that I had heard on an NPR story a few years ago, 2013, about a bunch of cardiologists in Sweden. I think they're at the University of Gothenburg. And they were trying to understand the stress mitigation aspect of singing and why it helped so many people increase their longevity. And so what they did was they hooked up a bunch of school choir participants to heart monitors, which they did it's like a little monitor that clips onto the lobe of your ear, and it monitors heart rates. So they did find that it lowers heart rates when you sing together, but the most interesting and unexpected thing they found was that within a few minutes of singing together, this choir ended up having their hearts beat in unison. Okay, so within a few minutes of singing together, everyone's heart beat in unison. And that really gives new meaning to this idea of whether or not we're singing off the same sheet of music, right? Kind of interesting. And I thought to myself when I heard this study, wow, what could this mean for alignment at work? What could this possibly mean, or could this mean anything at all, for how we're able to bring people together and solve problems at work if we could create that same type of alignment? And so I had an idea. I had to apply this to the last 2 workshops in this week, where I had all these crazy bookings. I had to figure out a way to be more intentional about helping people board this imaginary plane with me in these workshops in ways that would help boost that creation of mirror neurons, right? We had to figure out some way of creating more cohesion. So the next workshop I had to deliver was to 250 people in state agency leadership, right? So these are like managers and above, and people who it was mostly women, and the topic was promotion velocity and dealing with the gender pay gap. Not the most cheerful of topics. Well, it was interesting too, looking at the different agencies, because they all had different kind of results. But it's a topic that makes people feel a little bit anxious. And so I thought about the work of Claude Steele, who is a fantastic, incredible psychologist and expert. And he actually did some of the first work on understanding race and standardized test scores. And so what he found, and other people were able to find in replicating his work, was that if you could help people activate an authentic sense of pride that helped them differentiate from others and differentiate from any stereotypes, that helped boost their performance, right? If nothing else, it helped them not conform to negative stereotypes. So before this talk, where I was going to talk about the gender pay gap and how to close it and how to fix it, I had everyone in the room say this phrase together. Other people's experience does not directly affect the probability of my own success. And what was so interesting is that with very little prompting, the whole room read this slide in unison. It was really incredible. And I thought, wow, I think this workshop's going to go really great. And in fact, it did. It was a smashing success. I got a room of 250 people all working through different interactive activities that help them learn strategic communication and persuasion. And they had a lot of fun. And we managed to get most of it in. A lot of laughter, not a lot of checking of phones, a lot of eye contact with me, a lot of eye contact with each other when they had role playing that they had to do, and a ton of questions. And so these are, again, all these metrics that I look at and I think about when I know whether or not my training really landed with people. So I was off to the third and last workshop of that week. I had to get on a plane literally after the Texas training, fly to New Orleans, because that next morning I was going to kick off a day at a conference of about 100 software executives, and I had to figure out a way to make my training, which happened to be about collaboration, to make it meaningful, and also, open their day the right way. So I got up on that stage and I made everyone in the room in the theater get up and do some Tai Chi exercises with me. That was a synchronous activity. I made everybody stand up and we did 3 very gentle Tai Chi exercises. And it worked. It was great. It got people involved. Not a whole lot of people looking at their devices, being really engaged with one another. Lots of great questions during and after. And I knew I had hit my mark yet again. And so I was like, awesome, I did it. I figured it out. We figured out how to apply synchronous activities to the work and create really awesome outcomes. So then I had another idea. I was like, could we take a closer look at what's going on here? Because maybe it's not just about workshops that I'm giving. Maybe there's another way that we could keep looking at this and figuring out, could we measure what was going on? I mean, we also know on an intuitive level, at least the people, the CEOs and HR directors that book me to come and work with their teams, like we know that workshops have a way of breaking up the tedium of work and helping new employees build relationships with others. But I wasn't able to ever measure that in a meaningful way. And so I thought, could we measure this? Could we actually measure the effect of synchronized activities and how it might boost trust and loyalty ratings? So I designed a very simple experiment where we could measure the effect of doing synchronous activities on trust and loyalty ratings. And so I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't put people in an fMRI, machine to measure what parts of their brains light up, but I can have them take before and after quizzes to figure out how they rate certain things like trust and loyalty. The metric that I applied here was a simple statistical t-test to measure effect. And we were looking for statistical significance. We did a very simple 10-question survey, and people took the same survey in the pre-test and the post-test. And here are 2 of the questions on this 10-question survey. We had participants rate their trust and loyalty for their organization, their senior leadership, in other words, the C-suite, their direct manager, their teammates, and their coworkers. We had them rate it for trust. We had them rate it for loyalty. And I also randomly assigned them to the control or the treatment group. So in the control group, they had to take the pre-test, the before situation, warm up, do a warm-up collaboration, and then the kind of meat of the workshop was a collaborative business negotiation, and I'll explain more about that later. That was a paired activity, so they paired up with somebody, and I did this experiment. We did it in person, and we also did it twice on Zoom, very successfully, and then they took the post survey afterwards. In the treatment situation, there was the pre-test, and then we did something called the momentum clap, which is you start really slowly and quietly together. You're clapping in unison. And then you sort of build up, and you clap louder and faster, and then you kind of crescendo and then come back down. And so you're basically doing like a wave, but it's with clapping. And then we had them do the warm-up collaboration. And then after that, we had everybody do a game of Simon Says. And then we did the collaborative business negotiation, and we did the post-test afterwards. Again, remember that the intervention here from an experimental standpoint is the momentum clap and the game of Simon Says. Those are our synchronous activities. So in the language of behavioral science and statistics, our null hypothesis was there would be no difference in the pre and post scores of the control versus the treatment group, right? If there's no effect, there would be no measured effect, no difference. But if there was a measurable difference in pre and post scores, a statistically significant difference for control versus treatment groups, then we could reject the null hypothesis. And we could say that the intervention of doing synchronous activities might have caused this measurable shift. So let's talk about the 3 companies that were involved in this first round of experiments. The first company was a 100% virtual team, and it was an agency of software developers. And they had been around about, I think, 14 or 15 years, something like that. 100% virtual team, right? So they never actually worked in person. They had meetings where the whole group would get together, I think, twice a year. And they do everything over video conference and Slack. Company 2 has been around for almost 20 years, so a little bit older than Company 1. They're located in 3 offices in Virginia, Colorado, and North Carolina. They're an agency of software developers and designers, creative designers. There were a couple of people that were remote workers, but I think everybody that participated in the experiment were from one of those 3 offices where people worked in a co-located fashion. The last company was 100% in person. It was technical recruiters is who they were. I'm not entirely sure. I think they've been around for probably about 10 years. And we had about the same number of people participate for each company. I also asked participants to keep time to see how long it would take to complete each task, because that was something else we looked at. And so we're really looking at 3 things. We're looking at trust and loyalty scores with the pre and post test, length of time to complete an activity, and then price if the negotiation reached a deal in the business negotiation. So what do you think happened? There was a statistically significant boost in trust across the board for everyone. So that was pretty exciting to know that whether they just did the workshop or they did the synchronous activities and the workshop, that still caused a boost in trust for everyone. And that's exciting because then I knew that I'd actually measured the effect of doing these workshops, which I hadn't been able to do before. But that didn't actually answer the question. Right? So the question we had in front of us was, can we accept or reject the null hypothesis? Was there no difference or a measurable difference? And so we had to look at the subgroups. So this is how it shook out. In Company 1, the 100% virtual team, the treatment group had a statistically significant increase in trust and loyalty scores, but the control group had no significant change. Now, I should note that the control group had higher trust scores, but that what we were actually looking for was a statistically significant change in the rating, which is what we did find with the treatment group for both trust and loyalty scores. For Company 2, and remember that's where they're spread out between Virginia, Colorado, and North Carolina, the treatment group did exhibit statistically significant increase in trust scores, and the control group did not see any significant change. Now in Company 3, which is 100% in person here in Texas, the treatment group, we had a reversal. The treatment had no significant change, and the control group had significant increase in trust scores, which I found to be a little bit curious. But that's how they all shook out. And what also was curious was that I thought Company 1 was going to have the lowest scores because they were 100% virtual, and the in-person company was going to have the highest scores because they were in person. Because that was my other sort of pet theory, is that if you're seeing everybody every day, that you'd actually have higher trust. Turns out the opposite in this experiment was true. Company 1, the 100% virtual team, had the highest trust scores all across the board, highest loyalty scores all across the board. Company 3 had the lowest. So I thought, what the heck is going on here? And what we found was it's important to look at tenure. So the average tenure of an employee at the Company 1 was 4.2 years. The average tenure at Company 2 is 2.3 years. And the average tenure at the technical recruiting firm was 1.3 years. So length of time probably had, length of tenure, employee tenure probably had something to do with the results. But we also looked at the time it took to complete the activity, right? That also was important. So what we found was there was a difference for company 1 between treatment and control. The treatment took almost twice as long as the control to get those activities done. For company 2, treatment took a little bit longer, but not double the amount of time versus the control group. And for the third company, this was very interesting to me. It took not twice as long, but definitely longer. The control group took longer to complete the task than the treatment group. And so it made me wonder, does time have something to do with how trust is formed? Like maybe if we took more time with people, that also contributes to building or increasing trust. So the last thing we looked at was price, right? Price, if there was a deal in the negotiation. So let me take a step back and explain what the negotiation was. So the negotiation is the classic collaborative negotiation as taught by Urey and Fisher, and they're the folks that wrote, they're kind of the godfathers of collaborative and interest-based negotiation. They wrote Getting to Yes and Getting Past No. And so the scenario that partners had to work out was they were presented with a situation where it looked like it was competitive. So both people in the negotiation were supply chain managers, and one person was part of a software company and the other person was a part of a skincare company. And what they had to do was negotiate for the price of a fixed asset, 10 like boxes of grapefruits that both parties needed in order to manufacture their product. And so while at first it looked like there was only these 10 units and that only one person was going to be able to hit their goal, if they asked the right questions in the simulation, they would find out that the skincare company needed the rind and the shampoo company or the other company, whatever they're doing, they needed the pulp. So they actually could find a way to split up the asset. And one person had already bought the asset, which was $3,000, and the other person had an additional $3,000, but they had to negotiate a deal. So what happened on price? For the first company, the control group, their average price was $2,500, and the treatment price was $3,300. For the second company, it was a little bit more efficient. The control price was at $1,750 and the treatment average price was $1,857. And for the third company, the in-person company, the control price was about $2,200 and the treatment average price was about $2,200. So there wasn't actually a whole lot of difference in price for the last company. But what's interesting is that for each of the treatment groups, they ended up selling at a higher price. Now, really, to be economically efficient, you'd want everyone to come in at about $1,500 if they could negotiate that. No one was able to do that, but it's interesting to see how with the same exact scenario, very different kind of outcomes happened. I should also note, too, that the academic literature around negotiation and inducing empathy is really clear, right? Because that's the whole thing around mirror neurons, is that people talk a lot about creating empathy at work, which is important. But when you're negotiating with someone in a business negotiation, you got to be careful about inducing empathy. If you induce it in your negotiating partner, then they may be more willing in the short term to make decisions that are not economically advantageous to them. So in other words, they might be willing, if they feel empathy towards you, they might be willing to sell to you at a lower price than they should and leave money on the table, or they might buy something from you at a higher value than they should. And what the research shows pretty clearly is that over time, that negotiating partner will be less satisfied with the outcome. And that if you're more perspective taking and strategic, try to figure out something that's fair, like splitting the cost, that actually ends up being better for everybody involved. There's a great book called Friend and Foe by Adam Galinsky and Maurice Schweitzer, and they write a lot about when it makes sense to cooperate versus compete and how to be good at both and the effect of empathy in negotiation. Great book. I highly recommend it. But anyway, that's why there's a picture of a sad pug here, is that you got to be kind of careful when you're using empathy in a negotiation. Even too, when it's not just about selling something to someone else, but it's about creating empathy with your coworkers. Anyway, that gets us a little bit off the topic, which is our main metric that decides whether or not we can accept or reject the null hypothesis is the t-test of the before and after trust scores, right? The pre and the post surveys. So again, if we're looking at what happened here for company one in the virtual team, the treatment had a significant increase in trust and loyalty. The control had no significant change. In company 2, the treatment had significant increase in trust and control had no significant change. And in company 3, the treatment, we had a reversal. The treatment had no significant change and the control had significant increase in trust. So in each case, we actually, yes, did have a measurable difference, a statistically significant measurable difference. And so that means that we can reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative, that there is a difference. And in fact, there is a measured change depending on whether or not they did a synchronous activity. So that's really interesting. It means that the experiment in some ways was a huge success. Like we were able to measure some effect here, and that's really exciting. But I would also say as a cautionary tale that, I went to graduate school, like these experimental results are really interesting because they kind of point the way to more inquiry, but they really wouldn't stand up if it was like a peer-reviewed academic, panel. I'm not trying to get published in an academic journal, but, I'm also, to be clear, not sort of claiming any sort of causality. All that said, it does tell us something, suggest things that are aligned with other academic research out there about the nature of how we can create environments that boost cooperation, right? How we create those high trust, high performing teams. So let's talk a little bit about how all of this stuff I've been talking about, how it can help you encourage alignment and high trust teams, whether you're a team member or you are leading the team. You want to boost alignment and trust by encouraging a sense of curiosity and allowing for self-agency and ownership of problems where it makes sense, right? So Lindsay McGregor and Neil Doshi wrote a great book called Prime to Perform: How to Build Performing Cultures Through the Science of Total Motivation. And what they found was that when you can do stuff that creates a sense of play, purpose, and potential, that really helps with alignment and building trust and helping people bring their best selves to work. And in fact, play and curiosity and self-ownership, like all of these things are very interrelated, right? And so you want to help people feel like they can go and be independent problem solvers. At the same time, you also want to help them connect with their teammates and find regular ways for them to do that. You also, at the same time, from a business perspective, want to align all of this work with and make sure that people are out solving problems in ways that are aligned with the project goals. And also, if possible, and this is definitely important if you're a manager, you want to find ways to help individuals find alignment, right, and connection of their own values, professional values, and purpose with organizational goals, right? Like all of this connects up into the culture of an organization. Better alignment and collaboration also means better ability to innovate and cooperate and be nimble and pivot, which is something a lot of companies need these days. It reduces stress at work because it means we'll be able to help each other out. And that leads to increase in employee retainment and also profitability. And I'm not just saying this because it's like, I don't know, a good thing to say or morally correct, because it is those things. But there's actually been measurement where they've been able to see over time that there is a value of retaining an employee, right? And we want to hold on to employees for longer than just the investment zone, which is below the line there, right? Where organizations are putting money and time and effort into keeping that employee around. I don't know exactly what that number is in terms of tenure, right? I did read one study that said it's best to hold on to employees between 3 and 4 years. And at about 4 years, that's when they start moving into the return zone where they become highly profitable to the organization. It is not surprising to me that the company that I looked at in the experiments, their average length of tenure is 4 years, and they also had super high trust scores, right? And they also have super high retainment, right? So all these things are pretty interconnected. And so helping boost that trust and helping do things that help create connection and cooperation. Yes, it's about creating a great work environment, but that also does actually translate into profitability. And if you're not paying attention to that, you're just bringing employees, and if they quit, they quit, and so on and so forth, you're kind of just burning money. A lot of companies just write that stuff off to sort of the cost of doing business, and that's really kind of to the detriment of the organization. And so this kind of, though, brings us back to like employee fulfillment and how we're helping people kind of bring their best self to work. We do have a lot of companies where it's still in person, and that's how we engage with one another. But there's so much technology that allows for us to actually do better virtual work environments and virtual working. And it's just very interesting because not only do you get to wear like cool yoga pants like this lady, there's so many benefits to figuring out ways of being more flexible about how we work, and about how we can find ways to be really collaborative and cooperative in a flexible work environment. So that means we get to spend more time with people that we love, which is a wonderful thing. But it also can help reduce stress of sort of what happens when you have kids, right? You've got pick up and drop off, and you've got all the different practices and all the things that happen, trips to the grocery store when you have kids. But it eases up our ability to be more flexible in how we do work. It also eases up our ability to take care of extended family members, whether they're aging parents or family members that just need more care and attention. And that really means, too, that people can stick around because they feel like all parts of their lives are being supported. That also means we can take more cars off the road. Imagine that, like less burning of fossil fuels, less stress of road rage, and also less garbage pollution being put into the environment, right? Not to mention the reduction in overhead costs if we're using less things at the office, right? That could be, all of this kind of feeds into really positive potential. But it all starts with a great idea, right? It all starts with a willingness and an intention to get aligned. And either that's being aligned with your team or finding ways to help your team or your organization get aligned. And that means you're going to have to take time to make that happen. I mean, that's definitely one big takeaway for me in this experiment, in this first, round of experiments that we did, that taking that extra time is a really key ingredient to building trust. And there's no shortcut to that. You got to take the time and invest in people and help them see that, you got their back and they got your back and all those good things. But there's no shortcut to it. It just takes time. It might mean for a few moments at the beginning of a meeting, or, anything where you're getting people aligned on a vision, that you take a moment to breathe together. Maybe it's something simple like Tai Chi exercises. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a simple game of Simon Says. Whatever the case may be, we have enough evidence, I think, that synchronized activities really can produce a boosted sense of trust and increased cooperation. And that is so important. That connection is so important to building the type of cooperation and alignment that we need when we're really under the gun and we've got a tight deadline and we've got to get that project all the way to goal, and get that done on time and hopefully under budget. And if we've done it the right way, we've been good human beings and we've helped make those connections that make work and life so meaningful. We found purpose and we found friendship. So I hope you found this interesting. I know it was really fun to do this. I write a column on Forbes. Come check me out. I write about negotiation, collaboration, and equal pay. I'm really active on Twitter. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. And hey, if your company is looking to do a sort of brown bag or wants to be a part of this ongoing study that I'm doing of synchronized activities and boosted trust and collaboration, drop me a line. Love to find a way for all of us to grow smarter together.